Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
You suck.
Greetings, fellow humans. Once again, the sage of great gaming and vast knowledge is here to bestow upon all of thee the gifts of 90s era nostalgia and radically random information about a series of interesting and varied topics. In today's retro game feature, I will once again be showcasing yet another fighting game blast from the past that featured crazy martial arts mania as well as beautiful bouncing bunnies. Yeah, bunnies.
結構やるわね。覚えといてあげるわ。よし！やったー！私の勝ちね。
You pick up your palette knife and then work that into your meat. Give your meat a good old rub. Hot and spicy meat. Yeah, boy.
Dead or Alive was yet another early 3D fighting game from the year 1996 for arcades and both the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn in the following years of 1997 and 1998.
OMG, is that a fucking Sega reference?
I added that meme in because I think this is probably the first time I'm mentioning a Sega console on this channel. However, sadly, to disappoint any Sega fans out there, I have recorded this footage on a PSX emulator, since that's what I currently have on my PC at home. Maybe one day I might get a Sega emulator of some kind to showcase some Sega games, but until then we'll just have to make do. Dead or Alive was developed by Tecmo, and the initial goal was to ride the wave of hype and success of Sega's Virtua Fighter series at the time, which was essentially the very first successful 3D fighting game franchise, with Virtua Fighter 1 being released way back in 1993. Sega had also released the Sega Saturn console back in November 1994, the same year as the Sony PlayStation 1, which followed a month later in December. Now, because the Sega consoles were such a big deal, at least in the very first half of the 5th generation of home gaming consoles, more effort was put into the Sega Saturn port of Dead or Alive, since it was arguably far more powerful than a Sony PlayStation, and one can clearly see the difference between the two ports. Sadly though, Sega consoles fell out of favor by the end of the 90s due to terrible marketing outside of Japan and higher costs of both games and consoles, as well as being a far more complex system to develop games for in comparison to the PS1. Not much can be said of Dead or Alive other than it is quite an awesome fighting game franchise and is by far one of my favorites to play when I'm suffering from Tekken, Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat fatigue, because it seems like those three get all the hype nowadays. The story for the game is basically unimportant. Because not only does it not make any sense, as is typical for fighting games, but it more or less follows the exact same tropes. Big mega corporation hosts a tournament where the champion receives a lot of money, different fighters from around the world sign up to beat the shit out of each other for different reasons. Turns out Big Mega Corporation was involved in some extra shady business, and there's usually a Dark Hado, Devil Gene or some other evil martial arts essence that makes people lose their minds while turning them into a human tank, with a final boss character that is an absolute piece of shit to fight against, since they mostly run on bullshit AI that gets pleasure from making any player feel like a sub in a gimp suit, that most of the time isn't part of the regular character roster, unless you either use a cheat code or get the Super Ultra Champion Hyper Edition plus Alpha and Omega, where you unlock said boss character only for the player version to be utterly nerfed and useless compared to the one you fight in the standard arcade mode before finishing the game and getting a 5-second cutscene that makes no sense at all. Surely you all get the picture by now. But anyway, in my playthrough I decided to show off my pathetic skills at playing with a character called Gen Fu, who I'm not used to playing as because I'm more of a Jan Li and Kasumi main.
Right.
But the reason I chose to use this footage is because once again, I like to have my topics at least try to match the gameplay I use in my videos. And since Gen Fu is an elderly Kung Fu master, I figured he would be a great fit for the movie character and semi-historical figure featured in today's video, which also happens to be an elderly Kung Fu master. The white-browed, white-haired, and white-bearded martial arts icon from the Kill Bill movies called Pai Mei, or as he is sometimes referred to in that other Chinese language called Cantonese that nobody pays attention to except for Hong Kongers, Bak Mei. But for simplicity's sake, I will refer to him as Pai Mei, since most people probably recognize the white-browed Kung Fu master by this name thanks to Quentin Tarantino. Now, admittedly, Gen Fu in the Dead or Alive series doesn't even do the same fighting style as Pai Mei, with his being a modified for video game development purposes version of Xinyi Chuan, called Xinyi Liuhe Chuan, which itself is a real-life variant of Xinyi Chuan, but obviously adjustments had to be made for it to work in a fighting game. Xinyi Chuan basically meaning form intention fist in Mandarin Chinese. Pai Mei, according to Chinese folklore and legends, created his own style called Pai Mei Kung Fu or Bak Mei Kung Fu, but we will get more into his legendary deadly martial arts techniques later on. For now, let's start off with just how the strange white-browed master became such a pop culture icon within martial arts films, and try to figure out whether or not his character is based on an actual historical figure. Now, I'm sure most of us are familiar with the Kill Bill movies, directed by legendary American filmmaker Quentin Tarantino, and starring Uma Thurman in the lead role as the bride, who is out to get revenge on all her former colleagues within the professional assassination industry, as well as her former lover Bill, played by the greatest on-screen martial arts pretender, David Carradine. Now, the Kill Bill movies featured quite an interesting cast of highly unique characters, who all seem to take a lot of inspiration from a wide variety of martial arts and action films from the 1970s. The first movie especially being heavily inspired by both anime, as is evidenced by those extremely awesome anime sequences, and by a 1972 female samurai movie called Lady Snowblood, which seems to also have inspired the overall story of the Kill Bill movies as well. I mean, just look at these 4 scenes from both movies. But it was in the second film where moviegoers would get introduced to the white-bearded and white-haired Kung Fu master Pai Mei, played by the absolute legend of Hong Kong cinema, Gordon Liu, who you may know from the 36th Chamber of Shaolin movies. After beating her ass about a few times, Pai Mei eventually teaches the bride some really nasty chop-socky abilities, which include the famous 5-point palm exploding heart technique that is so devastating it will cause a man's heart to explode within 5 steps. But did you know that this would not be the first appearance of the smack-talking but deadly Kung Fu master in film? See, Pai Mei actually has his roots as a character, at least in terms of entertainment and pop culture, in the golden age of Hong Kong martial arts movies, which were all the rage back in the 1970s and 1980s, with him appearing in numerous films from that era, such as Shaolin Avengers from 1976, Executioners from Shaolin from 1977,
五行拳的招数，我比你还熟，想报你师傅之仇，还差得太远了。
Clan of the White Lotus released later in that same year,
A bunch of amateurs and useless creatures. I can handle all of you without using weapons.
and lastly, Abbot of Shaolin and Shaolin Rescuers, both from 1979, with all these prior films from the late 1970s featuring the legendary Shaw Brothers actor Lo Lie playing the role of what is essentially the Elden Ring boss of Kung Fu movies. There were a couple of other films as well from around this time that featured Pai Mei, or at least characters that may have been inspired by him, since they more or less have the exact same traits and backstory that he has, such as 1987's Wu-Tang vs. Ninja. One of my personal all-time favorites is 1977's Invincible Armor, where he, or rather a character inspired by him called Minister Cheng, is played by Korean actor and Taekwondo expert Hwang Jang-lee, who among hardcore Kung Fu movie fans is also known as Silver Fox, thanks to another role he played in one of these late 70s martial arts movies.
You're envious. I know. You want to be the master of Eagle Claw instead of me. That's why you want to see me dead. Why? Why?
Then there is another classic called Born Invincible, starring the Chinese beefcake Carter Wong, who you may know from John Carpenter's 1986 movie Big Trouble in Little China. Now, once again, while the villain character from Born Invincible isn't exactly Pai Mei, instead being called Tie Wu Chin, one can definitely see the similarities between the two characters, and I would argue that if it weren't for Pai Mei's appearance in movies like Shaolin Avengers in 1976, we probably wouldn't have had this trend of white-haired, long-bearded and long-browed Kung Fu villains who are seemingly indestructible and able to withstand deadly blows from any attack, even ones including weapons.
脚踏阴阳。四门八卦。
Oh, and yes, in many of these movies, he does indeed take pleasure in finishing off his opponents with the aforementioned 5-point palm exploding heart technique, or sometimes called the dim mak or touch of death, which, as wild as it sounds, makes a man's heart rupture upon taking just 5 steps after being struck with it.
And so began the legend of Pai Mei's 5-point palm exploding heart technique.
And what, pray tell, is the 5-point palm exploding heart technique?
Quite simply, the deadliest blow in all of martial arts. He hits you with his fingertips at 5 different pressure points on your body, and then lets you walk away. But once you've taken 5 steps, your heart explodes inside your body, and you fall to the floor.
You lot think you can escape? Go for your lives. Go on, run. Run away! Run away! Go on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Down.
In Clan of the White Lotus, the main character somehow survives because he collapses before taking the 5th step and was able to be nursed back to full health. Now this is clearly a technique that only exists within Kung Fu movie mythology, as well as Chinese wuxia or shanxia martial arts fantasy novels. But for whatever reason, there are certain individuals in this world that seem to firmly believe that they are real-life Pai Meis, such as this elderly donut-shaped man, George Dillman.
If you grab me, if he grabs me to muscle me, if I touch anywhere here, and just lightly tap here, whoa, I'm getting back. Can you hear me? Okay. You just sit there a minute.
I can't do this anymore.
Now, as we all know, Pai Mei would only end up reappearing on the silver screen with Tarantino's Kill Bill Volume 2 movie released back in 2004. The irony of this film appearance is that it is played by Gordon Liu, who back in 1977 played the hero attempting to defeat Pai Mei, who instead, as mentioned before, was played by Lo Lie in the previously mentioned Shaw Brothers classic Clan of the White Lotus. I guess the reason for him not reprising what was arguably his most famous role in the 1970s was most likely due to the fact that he sadly passed away at the age of 63 in 2002 from heart failure. Thus the role was given to Gordon Liu, who himself doesn't seem to be doing too great either in his old age, having been confined to a wheelchair and living out his days in a nursing home after suffering a severe stroke all the way back in 2011, which left him partially paralyzed on the right side of his body and with a speech impediment that caused him to slur his words. Last time I checked though, he seems to be doing a lot better and recently made a public appearance for the first time in years. He no longer slurs his words, but is sadly still confined to a wheelchair. He's hoping he does fully recover so that he might appear in one last film before he leaves this world. Now that we have covered the pop culture kung fu movie icon version of Pai Mei, let's take a look into the semi-historical version of Pai Mei. I say semi-historical because much of what could be considered his life story is so embellished and exaggerated by Chinese folklore and legend that it's difficult for many historians to even tell whether he was a real person, or if maybe he was based off a real person or a group of people, or simply a scary bedtime story that kung fu masters would tell to their students to scare them into taking their training more seriously. Now, when watching his appearances in film, one is able to pick up on a few small bits of lore here and there, that hint at somewhat of a backstory that seems to have its roots in actual historical events that took place within mainland China.
But you're still not good enough. This is no fun anymore.
Our story begins during the transitional phase from the Ming Dynasty to the Qing Dynasty in the mid-1600s. See, around this time, a Jurchen warlord named Nurhaci forcefully united all of the warring tribes under his iron-fisted rule, becoming the Khan of Manchuria. After this, he laid his eyes upon the slowly crumbling Ming Empire of China and decided it'd be a great idea to conquer it for himself and his people, who eventually became known as the Manchu. Nurhaci, however, wouldn't live to see the end of his conquest and the absolute subjugation of the Han Chinese people, since he would die in the year 1626 after being fatally wounded in battle. But the mission would be completed by the year 1644 by both his sons and grandsons, and thus the Han Chinese-led Ming Dynasty would be replaced by the Manchu-led Qing Dynasty, and the Manchus would proceed to punish the Han Chinese, especially those who were still regarded as Ming loyalists, for their resistance through severe mandates and laws to essentially strip them of their Han cultural identity, such as the hair mandate, wherein the new Qing government forced the Han Chinese to adopt traditional Manchu hairstyles by shaving off the front of their heads and tying the remaining hair at the back into a sort of long braid or queue. This was seen as humiliating for the majority ethnic Han Chinese, since long flowy hair was quite a big deal for them, being seen as a sign of masculinity according to Confucian teachings. Thus, by forcing the hair mandate upon Han Chinese men, it was essentially the Manchus' way of saying, "You are our bitch now and you will do as we say." For anyone who refused to adopt the new mandate, they would get to meet their maker early via execution, since rejection of the new hairstyle was seen as an act of rebellion against the Qing Empire. And as mentioned before, this was just one of the many new mandates and laws implemented in order to subjugate, oppress and force the Han Chinese to assimilate to Manchu rule. Now you may be wondering, how exactly does the famous Kung Fu movie villain Pai Mei fit into this whole story? Well, in Chinese martial arts folklore, there exists a legend that dates back to around the fall of the Ming Dynasty in the mid-17th century that revolves around a group of individuals who were associated with the legendary Shaolin Temple. These individuals being called the Five Elders or Five Great Kung Fu Masters, with each of their names being the Buddhist nun Ying Mui, who was the alleged founder of Wing Chun style Kung Fu, naming it after her student Yim Wing Chun, the Ming loyalist Feng Dao Dak, who was associated with the anti-Qing resistance group called the Red Flower Pavilion, Ji Xin, who was the abbot of the Shaolin Temple at the time, Niu Hin, a civilian student at the Shaolin Temple, and lastly, Bak Mei, or better known as Pai Mei, the star of today's episode. In most tales involving these five semi-historical figures, they are all charged with the preservation of Shaolin culture and martial arts after escaping the destruction of the temple in 1647, and supposedly many modern Chinese Kung Fu styles can trace their lineages to these five masters. However, while some of the five were hardcore Ming Dynasty loyalists, the legends surrounding this event often portray Pai Mei as a traitor, who not only viewed the Ming Imperial Dynasty as corrupt and in a state of decay, choosing to side with the Manchu-led Qing, but is also accused of being the one behind the destruction of the Shaolin Temple by the Qing armies.
You're right. A Piao Hong Wai Qing My whole purpose here is to kill you both and wipe out the whole lot of your Shaolin clan.
Huh, try me first.
Huh? You've just recovered. Let me.
See, throughout Chinese history, as I had mentioned in my video on the Shaolin Temple, linked down below, the legendary Buddhist monastery would often take in rebels, with many of these being vehemently against the Qing imperial government at the time, whom they viewed as foreign invaders since they were not ethnically Chinese. Rebels would use the Shaolin Temple as a sort of hideout, sometimes disguising themselves as lay peasants who would simply go to the temple either to worship or train in the martial arts, or as actual monks, even going so far as to take on vows and devote themselves to Buddhist teachings. The reason for this being that no one would really suspect a bunch of hermit monks who spend most of their days in deep meditation and study of Buddhist scriptures, and whose key philosophy is peace and respect of all life. Now, according to these Chinese legends, it was Pai Mei who allegedly sold out the Shaolin Temple to the Manchus by revealing that it was harboring anti-Qing rebels and Ming loyalists, and this led to the temple being attacked by the imperial armies and utterly destroyed, with many of the monks being killed, save for Pai Mei himself and the other 4 masters I had mentioned earlier. Eventually though, Pai Mei made his way to a different monastery at Mei Mountain, where he converted from Buddhism to Taoism, hence why he is often shown as a Taoist priest rather than a Shaolin monk in many kung fu movies that feature him. Upon reflection, he supposedly started to regret his betrayal of the Shaolin Temple. Like, kinda late for that now, isn't it, bruv?
What if you wanted to go to heaven, but God said,
He tried to atone for his sins by starting his own anti-Qing resistance groups, but was easily defeated by the might of the new imperial dynasty, and captured, where he was then forced to reveal the location of the mythical Southern Shaolin Temple, located in Fujian, which also harbored rebels that was supposedly led by one of the other escaped elders, Ji Xin, the former abbot of the Shaolin Temple in Hunan, to which the Qing responded by proceeding to destroy the one located in the south as well. Now, while this account paints Pai Mei as an absolute villain, there are other accounts that seem to be a little more gracious with our white-browed and long-bearded kung fu master. Another story has him appearing as more of a reluctant hero, who gets accused of betrayal simply for not wanting to be part of the anti-Qing revolution. This tale not only moves the date of the supposed destruction of the Shaolin Temple to the year 1723 and claims that it was only the southern one in Fujian that was destroyed and not the one in Hainan province, but also states that during this time, which was the reign of the Yongzheng Emperor, the decision was made to attack southern Shaolin Temple out of the fear that the warrior monks there had grown too powerful and that they may inspire rebellion among the local populace. After purging the southern Shaolin Temple for 70 days and hunting down all the monks who had escaped the initial attack, only the 5 elders that I had mentioned earlier remained, and all went into hiding. After 2 years of running and hiding from the Qing army, these fugitives of the cloth regrouped at the aforementioned Mount Mei in Sichuan province. As one of the sacred mountains of China, Mount Mei was home to about 70 monasteries and temples, where the 5 clerics could blend in quite easily. It was decided that Bak Mei or Pai Mei would infiltrate the Qing imperial court as a spy, while the others traveled throughout China to establish an alliance of anti-Qing rebels. However, the more Bak Mei learned, the more he realized that his allies' efforts would never be enough to overthrow the Qing, and so he left the rebellion, who took this as betrayal, forcing Bak Mei on the run from those he had once escaped with in the beginning. Pai Mei was eventually killed, but accounts disagree on whether he was poisoned or slain. Over the years, the rebels sought to punish him for his defection. Almost all who made an attempt on his life, though, ended up dead at his hands. This included the abbots Ji Xin and Mu Hin's son or grandson, Feng Si Yu, depending on the source, whom Pai Mei had known since Siyu was a small boy, and who is also a fairly popular Chinese folk hero that has appeared in many kung fu movies as well, two of the most famous being the Legend films starring Jet Li. Some say that Pai Mei was finally killed by the combined effort of Hu Manting and Wu Abiu, who employed the crane style and tiger style to avenge the burning of the Shaolin temple and the death of their Sigum or teacher's teacher, the venerable aforementioned Ji Xin. The abbot whom Bak Mei is said to have killed in a duel during the burning of the temple. Now there are many more accounts of Pai Mei or Bak Mei or Pak Mei, whichever you prefer, which tend to vary greatly from one another, often shifting the actual dates around and switching in between him being a Jedi, a Sith Lord, or a Grey Jedi of Kung Fu movies. Though I admit that the Sith Lord version of him is way cooler.
My Tiger Kung Fu is better than yours. I don't think you're good enough to avenge your master.
Another fun fact as well is that the name Pai Mei does indeed mean white eyebrows in Chinese, hence why he is always seen in such a way in Kung Fu movies, with his elongated eyebrows supposedly being a sign of longevity in Chinese culture. But this begs the question though, with all these tales and legends that have been told since the late 17th century, was there actually a real historical figure called Pai Mei or Bak Mei? Well, it's extremely difficult to say, since aside from this one alleged portrait of him, there is very little evidence to prove his existence. The earliest reference to the monk Pai Mei as an actual person comes in the wuxia novel called Wu Nian Qing, 1,000 Years Green or Evergreen, as being one of the 5 elders who survived the sacking of the Shaolin temple, with this date being 1727 by the Qing army. Yet there are problems with this source, being that it is a work of fiction, and there is no historical evidence to suggest that the Shaolin temple of Hainan province was ever attacked or destroyed by the Qing armies. But this is not unexpected, considering the burning and erasure of many martial texts in Shaolin history. Now, upon researching for this video, I realized that in my previous video regarding the Shaolin temple, I had mentioned the destruction of the temple at Hainan province by the Qing armies in the year 1647. But it turns out after further research that many Chinese historians sometimes consider this to be a fictional account, rather than a real historical event, and this is due to its association with tales like the one about the 5 Shaolin elders or masters, which include Pai Mei, and then also the date of said destruction being shifted to the early to mid 1700s as well, and then other claims of it being the southern Shaolin temple in Fujian being destroyed instead of the one in Hainan, with most historians now agreeing that the decline of the Shaolin temple during the Manchu-led Qing dynasty from 1645 to 1912 was more of a gradual one caused by both persecution and small-scale attacks rather than one singular event. So this had left me utterly confused as to whether the Shaolin temple was ever fully destroyed or not during this time period, since some sources say it was and others say it wasn't. If you haven't seen it yet, and do end up watching that Shaolin temple video after this one, just bear in mind that Google's AI assistant f***ing lied to me at the time when I tried to look up for dates for when the Shaolin temple was destroyed in Chinese history. And we're supposed to believe that AI is going to fix all of society's problems. Anyway, to get back on track, aside from a whole bunch of greatly conflicting and highly embellished folktales and legends, there doesn't seem to be any hard evidence that a Shaolin master turned Taoist priest named Pai Mei ever existed. However, one thing that is very real that may be related to the legend is Bak Mei Chuan, or white-browed fist, which is an actual southern-based kung fu style and is characterized by its emphasis on powerful close-range hand strikes that borrows heavily from and combines techniques from other kung fu styles like the tiger and leopard fist styles, as well as featuring a different salute where the open hand is above the clenched fist instead of being beside it like in other Chinese martial arts systems. The style itself is said to have originated from Mei Shan, or the Mei mountain monasteries, where according to the legends, Pai Mei and his disciples escaped to after the Shaolin temple was destroyed. But anyway, we have reached the end of yet another episode of the 8-Bit Academic, and as always, I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts or suggestions on this episode, please don't hesitate to rant away to your heart's content in the comments down below. You may even get a response from me. Thank you for all the likes and subscriptions as well. They really go a long way in helping me win the fight against YouTube's useless algorithm. And may you all have a wonderful weekend. See you next time. Cheers.
You are most certainly improving. Even defeated my swordsman. You've been lucky.
What's wrong with you? You're acting strangely.
My new style. I see you've come prepared to be my guest then. Come on, not so bad. It improves the hearing. That has no effect on me. Hey, you. Your technique is still not good enough for a master.
What's wrong?
Well, I guess I'd better show you. Watch me, then. I'll not show you again. You think you're good, but you're not, you know. You see, pulses are buried in your muscles. Your punch must be accurate, accompanied with force. Then that is called perfection. Got it? Don't worry. I've not hit your vital parts. I don't want you to die here, ruining my sacred chapel and my home. I'll make sure you die somewhere else. You'll die slowly after my 100-pace palm. Now get out of here. Hurry along, sonny boy.